7 seconds. That's all it took for Johnny Cash to realize he was standing next to something beyond talent, beyond training, beyond anything he'd ever witnessed in his decades around music. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's back up to the moment that led to those 7 seconds, a moment that would become one of the most legendary encounters in music history. Nashville, 1956. The Grand Ole Opry backstage area smelled like cigarettes, hair pomade, and ambition. Johnny Cash leaned against a wall, tuning his guitar before his set when the commotion started. Voices rising, people moving quickly toward the stage entrance. Someone said a name that made Johnny look up: Elvis Presley. Now Johnny had heard the stories. Everyone had. This young kid from Memphis, shaking his hips on television, driving teenage girls crazy, making parents nervous. Rock and roll, they called it, a threat to decent society, according to some. But Johnny Cash wasn't interested in moral panic or cultural commentary. He was interested in one thing: could the kid actually sing? They met in the hallway. Elvis, 21 years old, wearing a pink shirt that would have gotten most men laughed out of Nashville, but somehow worked on him. Confident, but not cocky, polite, but not fake. He shook Johnny's hand and called him sir, even though Johnny was only 4 years older. "Mr. Cash, I'm a real admirer of your work," Elvis said. Johnny studied him. Up close, away from the cameras and screaming crowds, Elvis looked different. Younger, more uncertain. His hands fidgeted with his belt buckle, a nervous habit Johnny would later learn never quite went away. "Heard you're tearing up the charts," Johnny replied. "That true or just publicity?" Elvis grinned, and something shifted in his demeanor. The nervousness evaporated. "Little bit of both, I reckon." They talked for maybe 10 minutes. Music, mostly. Gospel influences, blues records they both loved, the strange new world of television appearances and radio interviews. Johnny found himself genuinely liking this kid, which surprised him. He'd expected arrogance, the kind that comes with sudden fame. Instead, he found someone genuinely passionate about music, someone who listened when you talked. Then Elvis said something that stuck with Johnny for the rest of his life. "Mr. Cash, can I ask you something? How do you know when a song is real? Not just good, but real?" Johnny paused mid-cigarette. Nobody had ever asked him that before. Most conversations backstage were about chart positions, venue sizes, record sales. But this kid wanted to talk about truth in music. "You feel it in your chest before you feel it in your throat," Johnny said. "If it's real, you can't help but sing it. It sings itself through you." Elvis nodded slowly, like he was filing that answer away somewhere important. That's when Johnny made the challenge. Not because he doubted Elvis, but because he was curious. Genuinely curious what this phenomenon, this cultural lightning bolt, actually sounded like when you stripped away the hip movements and the teenage hysteria. "You know any gospel?" Johnny asked. "Grew up on it," Elvis said. "Sing something with me, right here, right now. 30 seconds. Let me hear what you got." Elvis didn't hesitate, didn't ask what song, didn't need a key or a starting note. He just opened his mouth and began singing "Peace in the Valley," a song Johnny knew backward and forward. What happened in those first 7 seconds changed everything Johnny Cash thought he knew about singing. Elvis's voice filled that narrow backstage hallway with a richness Johnny had never heard before. Not louder than necessary, not showing off. Just pure, honest sound. It had weight, but also lightness. Power, but also vulnerability. Within 3 seconds, Johnny stopped singing. He literally couldn't continue. His voice caught in his throat, not from emotion, but from sheer recognition of what he was hearing. By second 7, Johnny Cash understood something profound. This wasn't just talent. Talent was common enough in Nashville. You could throw a rock and hit someone with pipes. This was different. This was someone who could make a song feel like prayer, conversation, and confession all at once. Someone who understood instinctively what Johnny had tried to explain about truth in music. Elvis kept singing, eyes closed now, lost in the song the way people get lost in church when the Spirit moves through them. Johnny just stood there, guitar hanging forgotten in his hand, watching this kid in a pink shirt transform a backstage hallway into something sacred. The song ended. Elvis opened his eyes, suddenly looking young and uncertain again. "Was that all right?" he asked. Johnny realized his mouth was open. He closed it, tried to find words, failed, tried again. "Where'd you learn to sing like that?" "Church, mostly." "My mama." Johnny shook his head slowly. "No. I mean, where'd you learn to make a song sound like it's the only true thing in the world?" Elvis looked genuinely confused by the question. Doesn't everyone sing like that? And that's when Johnny Cash understood the real gift. Elvis didn't know. He didn't know that what he did was extraordinary. He thought everyone felt music this deeply. Everyone could channel emotion this purely. His genius was so natural, he couldn't see it. "If you can sing like that," Johnny said quietly, "I'll call you master. I mean it." Elvis laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Johnny wasn't joking. He'd just witnessed something that would change how he thought about music forever. Those 7 seconds had revealed a truth bigger than rock and roll or country or any genre label. They'd revealed what happens when someone sings not for applause or charts or fame, but because the music demands to be sung. What Johnny didn't know yet was that this moment would ripple forward through both their careers, shaping decisions, influencing approaches, creating a mutual respect that would last decades. What Johnny didn't realize in that backstage hallway was that Elvis had been watching him too, studying him, learning from him. Because before Elvis sang those 7 seconds that stopped Johnny cold, he'd spent the previous hour watching Johnny perform, watching how he commanded silence with just his presence, how he could make 20,000 people lean forward with nothing but his voice and a guitar. Elvis had seen something he'd been searching for without knowing it. Authority. Not the kind that comes from volume or theatrics, but the kind that comes from absolute confidence in your own truth. Johnny Cash didn't perform for approval. He performed because he had something to say, and you were going to listen. That certainty, that unshakable sense of purpose, was what Elvis had been missing. On stage, Elvis could drive crowds wild. He knew that. But he also knew something else. Something he'd never admitted to anyone. He wasn't sure if they loved him or just loved the excitement he created. The screaming was so loud he couldn't hear himself think, much less sing with any real intention. Watching Johnny, Elvis understood the difference between making noise and making impact. So when Johnny asked him to sing, Elvis didn't just perform. He showed Johnny what he'd learned from watching him. He sang with purpose, with intention, with the kind of truth Johnny had been preaching about all tour. Standing there as the last note faded, Elvis felt something shift inside himself. Permission. Not permission from Johnny, though that mattered. Permission from himself to trust that quiet power he felt in church, in those late-night gospel sessions, in the moments when music felt like prayer. Johnny's reaction confirmed it. You didn't need to shake buildings. You needed to shake souls. You should record gospel, Johnny said, still processing what he'd heard. Seriously, not rock, gospel. Elvis smiled. My manager would have a heart attack. Your manager isn't the one with the gift. The statement hung between them. Simple, direct, true. Elvis had spent 2 years being told what to sing, how to move, what image to project. Everything calculated for maximum commercial impact. And it had worked spectacularly. He was the biggest star in America. But standing in that hallway with Johnny Cash, who didn't care about any of that, Elvis felt something he hadn't felt since his first recording session at Sun Studio. Freedom. Come to my show tonight, Elvis said suddenly. Not backstage, out front. I want you to see something. Johnny raised an eyebrow. See what? What happens when you stop trying to give people what they expect and start giving them what they need? That night's performance became legendary for different reasons than anyone anticipated. Elvis walked on stage and did something unprecedented. He stopped the show 15 minutes in. Just stopped. The band looked confused. The audience fell silent, uncertain if something was wrong. Y'all came here to scream, Elvis said into the microphone, his voice carrying that new authority he'd found. And we can do that. We can do all the hits, all the hip shaking, all the stuff you've seen before. He paused. Or I can sing you something real. 20,000 teenagers expecting a rock and roll riot suddenly found themselves listening to Elvis Presley sing Peace in the Valley, the same way he'd sung it for Johnny Cash 5 hours earlier. No theatrics, no performance, just truth. The silence was absolute. You could hear breathing. You could hear the building settle. You could hear 20,000 people suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something they couldn't name, but would never forget. Johnny, standing in the wings, felt tears on his face. Not from the beauty of Elvis's voice, though it was beautiful, from recognition. Elvis had listened, had understood, had trusted enough to risk everything in front of thousands of people who came expecting something completely different. When the song ended, the silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Then applause. Not screaming, not hysteria. Respect, recognition. 20,000 people acknowledging they'd just experienced something sacred. Elvis returned to the rock and roll set afterward. Gave them Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel and all the hits. But something had changed. The performance had weight now. Purpose. He wasn't just entertaining, he was connecting. Backstage afterward, Johnny found Elvis sitting alone in his dressing room, still processing what had happened. You scared? Johnny asked. Terrified, Elvis admitted. What if that's not what they want? What if they just want the show? Johnny sat down. Then they'll tell you. But tonight? Tonight they wanted truth. You felt it same as I did. Elvis nodded slowly. It felt like church. Like when gospel singers stop performing and start testifying. That's exactly what it was. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Elvis said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me it's possible. To be huge and still be honest. To give people what you need to give them instead of just what they want." Johnny smiled. "You already knew that. You just needed permission to believe it." What neither of them knew was that this conversation, this moment, would echo through both their careers. Elvis would return to gospel repeatedly, finding his truest voice in those recordings. Johnny would point to this tour as the moment he understood his own purpose differently. But more than that, they'd discovered something essential about artistry itself. That the most powerful performances aren't the ones where you show people what you can do. They're the ones where you show people who you are. The tour continued. 6 more cities. But everything had shifted. They weren't just two stars sharing a stage anymore. They were brothers teaching each other different dialects of the same language. Truth, Phoenix, then San Antonio, then Houston. Each city brought something different. Phoenix gave them scorching heat and an outdoor venue where dust devils spun through the parking lot. San Antonio offered a crowd so loud that Elvis joked they could hear it in Mexico. Houston packed them into a space designed for 8,000 that somehow held 12. The pattern held. Johnny would open with that stripped-down authenticity he'd perfected. Elvis would follow with the rock and roll spectacle. Then somewhere in the middle, usually without planning it, one of them would shift the energy toward something deeper. Gospel, blues, the raw material underneath the shine. In Phoenix, it was Johnny who made the move. He'd been watching Elvis carefully all tour, seeing how the younger man was processing their earlier conversations. Halfway through his set, Johnny stopped between songs and spoke directly to the audience. "You know what's interesting about touring with Elvis Presley?" he said. The crowd cheered, expecting a compliment. "It's that everyone thinks they know who he is. The hip shaker, the pretty boy, the guy who made your mama faint." Elvis, watching from backstage, tensed slightly. "But what they don't know," Johnny continued, "is that before any of that, he was a gospel singer. Still is. And I'm going to prove it to you right now." He turned toward the wings. "Elvis, get out here." The crowd erupted. Elvis walked out, genuinely surprised, no idea what Johnny had planned. "Sing with me," Johnny said simply. "No show, no performance, just sing." They stood at the center of the stage. 2 microphones, no script. Johnny started "I'll Fly Away," and Elvis joined in without hesitation. Their voices found each other immediately, Johnny's bass grounding Elvis's soaring tenor. The arrangement was spontaneous, imperfect, completely real. The audience response was different here than in Los Angeles. Western crowd, country sensibilities. They recognized authenticity instantly. By the second verse, people were singing along, not screaming, singing, harmonizing, turning a concert into a revival. When it ended, Johnny put his arm around Elvis's shoulders. "That's who he really is," he told the crowd. "Remember that." Elvis didn't speak, just nodded his thanks and walked off stage, visibly moved. Later, on the bus between Phoenix and San Antonio, they talked about it. "You ambushed me," Elvis said, but he was smiling. "You needed to see something," Johnny replied. "You keep acting like you have to choose, rock star or gospel singer, entertainer or artist. You don't. Feels like I do. Colonel Parker certainly thinks so." Johnny leaned forward. Parker thinks in dollars. That's his job. Your job is truth. You can do both, but if you ever have to choose, choose truth. Money comes and goes. Legacy stays. Elvis absorbed this silently. Besides, Johnny added, you saw that crowd tonight. They didn't want less of you when we sang gospel. They wanted more. They wanted the real thing underneath all the packaging. The San Antonio show brought a different challenge. Technical problems plagued the venue from the start, microphones cutting out, stage lights flickering, sound system feedback that made Johnny wince. Elvis, who'd been fighting exhaustion all week, started getting frustrated. His performance tightened. The joy drained out of it. He was going through motions, hitting marks, delivering lines he'd delivered 1,000 times. From the wings, Johnny recognized the signs. He'd been there himself. That moment when the grind of touring turns art into assembly line work, when you stop feeling and start executing. During a costume change, Johnny found Elvis in his dressing room, head in his hands. I can't do this tonight, Elvis said. Everything's wrong. The sound's terrible. I'm exhausted. I just want to get through it and leave. Johnny sat down. Then don't. Don't what? Don't get through it. Stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to give them the show they expect. Just be present. Be honest about where you are right now. I can't go out there and tell 12,000 people I'm too tired to perform. Why not? Elvis looked up, surprised. I'm serious, Johnny said. What if you just told them the truth? That it's been a long tour? That the equipment's fighting you? That you're human? You think they'd respect that or hate it? I think Colonel Parker would have a heart attack. Parker's not here. I am. And I'm telling you that 12,000 people would rather see you honest and imperfect than fake and polished. Elvis sat with that for a long moment. When he returned to the stage, something had shifted. He walked to the microphone and did exactly what Johnny suggested. Y'all, he said, I'm going to be straight with you. This has been a long week. The equipment tonight is giving us fits. And honestly, I'm tired. He paused. So I'm not going to try to be perfect for you. I'm just going to sing. And if I mess up, well, that's part of it. The honesty landed perfectly. The crowd didn't want perfection. They wanted connection. And Elvis, freed from the pressure of flawless execution, gave them his best show of the tour. Loose, playful, real. Afterward, Johnny found him backstage, grinning. That, Elvis said, was the most fun I've had performing in years. Because you stopped performing and started being. Houston brought the tour's biggest crowd and its most electric energy. Texas knew how to show up. The venue vibrated with anticipation before either artist took the stage. But it also brought a reckoning neither of them expected. One that would test everything they'd learned about truth, performance, and the cost of honesty. It started with a newspaper article. A local music critic who'd covered the previous night's San Antonio show had written something that was now spreading through the Houston venue. Someone handed Johnny a copy 2 hours before showtime. He read it twice, then walked to Elvis's dressing room. We need to talk, he said quietly. Elvis looked up from the mirror where he'd been adjusting his collar. The tension in Johnny's voice made him set down the brush. What is it? Johnny handed him the newspaper. Elvis scanned the article, his expression darkening with each line. The critic hadn't attacked the performance. He'd attacked something deeper. The piece questioned whether their entire tour was authentic or calculated, whether two legends singing together was genuine connection or cynical marketing, whether Elvis's recent vulnerability on stage was real evolution or manufactured image rehabilitation. "It's brutal," Elvis said quietly. "It's also raising questions half the audience tonight will be asking themselves." Johnny sat down heavily. Are we real, or are we selling them a story? The question hung between them. Outside, crew members rushed past preparing for the show. Inside that dressing room, two men faced something more dangerous than bad reviews. They faced doubt. Elvis read one paragraph aloud. "Cash and Presley want us to believe they found something profound together. But scratch the surface and you find what you always find with Vegas acts: polish, calculation, two careers getting a publicity boost by pretending to bare their souls." "Ouch," Johnny said. "The thing is," Elvis set the paper down, "he's not entirely wrong." Johnny looked at him sharply. "I mean about me," Elvis clarified. "Not you. Not this tour, but my career. Vegas? The jumpsuits? He's right. I've been polished and calculated for years. So when I try to be real now, why should anyone believe it?" "Because you are being real." How do they know that? How does anyone know what's performance and what's truth when your whole life is performance? It was the question neither of them had wanted to voice. The fundamental problem of being an artist. Where does the person end and the persona begin? Can you ever truly be authentic when authenticity itself becomes part of the show? Johnny stood and walked to the window overlooking the venue. 12,000 people were filing in, excited, expectant. They'd paid money. They deserved something. But what? "I don't have an answer," he admitted. "I've struggled with this my whole career. Every time I sing about redemption, part of me wonders if I'm exploiting my own recovery. Every time I talk about June saving my life, am I sharing truth or selling a narrative?" "So what do we do?" Johnny turned back. "We go out there and sing. Not because we have something to prove to that critic. Not because we need to convince anyone we're authentic. We sing because that's what we do. And if people see through it, if they think it's calculated, that's their right. That's it? Just accept that we might be frauds?" "No." Johnny's voice was firm. "Accept that we can't control how people perceive us. All we control is whether we show up honestly. The rest isn't ours to manage." Elvis stood slowly. "You know what the worst part of that article is? Not that he called us calculated, that he might be right, that I've been performing so long, I don't know anymore what's real and what's reflex. Then tonight, we find out. How? We strip everything away. No banter, no stories, no explanations. We just sing. Let the music speak. If there's truth in us, it'll come through. If there's not, well, at least we'll know." The idea terrified Elvis. No safety net, no charm to fall back on, no way to control the narrative. Just voice and song, and whatever truth or calculation lived in them. "All right," he said finally, "let's do it." They walked to the stage together, neither speaking. The crowd roared when they appeared, but Johnny held up a hand for quiet. When the arena settled, he spoke directly into the microphone. "We're not going to talk much tonight. We're just going to sing. If that's enough, good. If it's not, that's fair too. The audience didn't know how to respond. This wasn't the show they expected. No jokes, no stories, just two men and their instruments. Elvis started with a gospel song, not one of his hits, something old, something his mother used to sing. His voice cracked on the first line. He didn't try to hide it, didn't restart, just kept going. Johnny joined on the second verse, harmonizing. They weren't looking at the crowd. They were looking at each other, listening, responding. This wasn't performance. This was conversation through music. The set list they'd planned went out the window. They sang whatever came next. Sometimes Elvis led, sometimes Johnny. Sometimes they'd finish a song and stand in silence for 10 seconds before starting another. The audience sat unusually quiet, sensing something different was happening. An hour in, Elvis's voice was starting to give out. Instead of pushing through, he stopped mid-song and spoke for the first time. I don't know if what we're doing tonight is real or not. I don't know if I know how to be real anymore, but this is the best I've got. The vulnerability of that admission cut through every defense. Johnny stepped to his microphone. Me too. They finished the show with one more song. No encore. No big finale. Just an honest ending to an honest night. Backstage, neither of them spoke at first. They'd taken the biggest risk of the tour. Stripped away everything except the core question. Are we real? Elvis finally broke the silence. Did we answer it? Johnny shook his head. I don't think that's a question you answer once. I think it's a question you keep asking every single night. The Houston newspaper the next morning ran a review. Different critic, different perspective. It didn't call them authentic or calculated. It simply said they'd witnessed something rare. Two artists brave enough to not know the answer. That question followed them through the remaining tour dates. Not the magazine's question anymore. Their own. Are we real or are we performing realness? In Phoenix, they experimented with silence. Long pauses between songs, letting moments breathe. Some audiences fidgeted. Others leaned in. In Denver, they played a 40-minute set. No explanation, just walked off when it felt complete. The promoter was furious. The crowd gave a standing ovation. Each night became its own test, not of talent, of honesty. Can you be authentic when 20,000 people are watching? When cameras are rolling? When tomorrow's review depends on tonight's choices? The tour wrapped in Los Angeles. Final show. Both of them exhausted, not from performing, from the constant internal examination, the relentless questioning of every impulse. They sat in Elvis's hotel room after the last encore. Room service had delivered food neither of them touched. The silence between them was comfortable now. They'd earned it through weeks of brutal honesty. I figured something out, Johnny said eventually. What? The reason that article got to us so bad. It wasn't calling us calculated. It was that we couldn't prove we weren't. Elvis nodded slowly. He'd been circling the same thought. Because here's the thing, Johnny continued. Every time we tried to prove we were authentic, that was a performance too. Every stripped-down set, every vulnerable moment, we were aware of doing it, which made it calculated, which made it not authentic. We were trapped. So what do? Stop trying to prove anything to them, to ourselves. Just do the work. Some nights it'll feel real. Some nights it won't. That's the deal. It sounded simple. It wasn't. 3 months after the tour ended, Elvis was back in Vegas. same stage, same spotlight, same expectations. But something had shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. He stopped worrying about which version of himself was performing, the calculated one or the real one. He just sang. Some nights felt transcendent, others felt mechanical. He stopped judging the difference. Johnny went back to the studio, started recording an album. Didn't agonize over every lyric wondering if it was honest enough. Just wrote. Some songs came from deep places. Others were craft. He released them all. They didn't talk as often. Not because the friendship had faded, because they'd said what needed saying. Years later, a music journalist asked Elvis about that controversial article, whether he felt the criticism was fair. Elvis thought for a long moment. I used to think there was a real me underneath the performer, that if I could just strip away enough layers, I'd find this authentic core. But maybe that's not how it works. Maybe we're all performing, all the time. And the question isn't whether you're authentic, it's whether you're honest about the performance. The journalist looked confused. Elvis didn't elaborate. Johnny gave a similar answer when asked the same question. Every time I walk on stage, I'm making choices. What to wear, how to stand, which songs to play. You could call that calculated. You could call it professional. You could call it art. Labels don't change what it is. Music. Either it moves people or it doesn't. That's the only test that matters. Neither answer satisfied the critics who wanted clear definitions, who needed artists to be either authentic or fake. No middle ground. But Elvis and Johnny had found something more valuable than satisfying critics. They'd found peace with the unanswerable question. The Houston article that started it all got framed eventually, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Johnny kept it in his studio. Elvis kept a copy in his music room at Graceland. Both of them would look at it sometimes when they felt too comfortable, too certain, too convinced they'd figured it out. The article reminded them they never would, that the question itself was the point. Because art isn't about arriving at answers. It's about living inside questions, sitting with discomfort, accepting that you'll never know for sure if what you're doing is real or rehearsed or some impossible combination of both. The tour didn't solve anything. It couldn't. But it taught them to stop trying, to trade certainty for curiosity, defensiveness for exploration. They'd started those shows trying to prove something to critics, to audiences, to themselves. They'd ended them understanding proof wasn't possible or necessary. Decades later, bootleg recordings from that tour would circulate among serious collectors. The audio quality was poor. The performances weren't technically perfect, but something came through. Something harder to fake than vocal control or instrumental precision. Two artists grappling with an impossible question in real time. Not finding answers. Just refusing to look away from the difficulty. That's what people heard in those scratchy recordings. Not authenticity or calculation. Something deeper. The sound of artists brave enough to doubt themselves publicly, to strip away certainty and sit with maybe. The magazine that published the original article folded years ago. The critic who wrote it moved to other work. But the question survived, because it's everyone's question eventually. Not just for performers, for anyone paying attention to their own life. Are you real? Or are you performing? And what if the answer is both? What if the performance is the realness? What if trying to separate them is the actual mistake? Elvis and Johnny never answered it definitively. They just kept singing. Some nights calculated, some nights transcendent, most nights somewhere in between. That's not a compromise. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. We contain multitudes. We're always performing. We're always real. The contradiction doesn't resolve. You just learn to live inside it, and if you're lucky, you find someone else brave enough to live there with you. To sit in a hotel room after a show and say, I don't know either. That's shared not knowing. That might be the most authentic thing of all. 7 seconds that led to a lifetime of questions neither could answer. That tour didn't give Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley certainty about what was real and what was performance. It gave them something better. Permission to stop searching for the dividing line. To accept that maybe the search itself was the point. They learned you don't prove authenticity. You live inside the question of it every single night. Some performances feel transcendent. Others feel mechanical. Both are true. Both are you. And the willingness to show up anyway, uncertain and afraid and still singing, that might be the only honest thing any artist can offer. Not answers. Just the courage to keep asking.